This is Dmitry Ivanovich with an update. After several months of dealing with the Department of Human Services through Sherry Duncan, I finally received a medical card on this date. Now, whereas this is a supplement to the last report that I have made on these networks, I have an additional thing to say. When I was denied my right to defend myself in federal court, and a guilty plea was entered on behalf of the government in my case, I declined. I didn't want to plead guilty to something I didn't do. I spent 2 years in federal custody, in which I was beaten so badly one day I woke up sitting up in a pool of my own urine with my head cracked, bleeding. But that's not the main topic of this subject. When I got out of federal prison, my food stamps had been reduced to a level that you can't really live on. Then they were further reduced another $20. And in spite of the rent receipts I was able to provide, I was told by Sherry Duncan and a guy named Utah, and currently a guy named Healy, who is supposed to be managing my case, that my food stamps don't have anything to do, the allotment I received don't have anything to do with the amount of rent I pay. Well, I just received final word by Lori Miller, who, by the way, was the director in the Bicentennial Building, who altered federal records to try to limit my food stamps to $10 a month. And that had been going on since 2007. Well, now I'm getting a lot more food stamps. And I can only attribute that to the freedom of the press. I'm a gonzo journalist, and maybe I do things that aren't recommended or taught in a school of journalism. But being a journalist only means one thing, that you keep a journal. That's all I gotta do. You don't even have to publish it. But I do. 2 years ago, a cunt, and I use the term cunt because it means can't understand normal thinking. A cunt who is an administrative law judge for the Department of Human Services held a hearing on my food stamp issue, and before that hearing even started, she called me a liar. Amazing. She thinks she's Judge Judy. You know, Judge Judy does the things that she does because it's a theatrical procedure. It's on television. But Christine Dreckman is not Judge Judy. And Christine Dreckman, on the record, because I made a record of it, it's a video like this, and I'm going to play that for you soon. That hearing lasted a little less than an hour. And during that hearing, Christine Dreckman ruled that my rent payment didn't have anything to do with the amount of food stamps I'm receiving. Well, because I've been publicizing this on the web, the Department of Human Services has decided that it does. And Lori Miller who my best information indicates was the director when these adverse decisions, which were only made because of the whim and caprice of some cunt, said, we don't want to give this guy what his entitlement calls for. We don't want to do that. Now, why am I getting my entitlement? I'm getting my entitlement because I was beaten silly by 2 Scott County officers. Their names were Hal Wilkerson and Laurel Mulvaney. And those guys were called Bump and Thump by members of the police department they deal with, the Scott County Pigs. And for at least a decade before they met me, they were beating the fuck out of long-haired, bearded males, and they were allowed to get away with it. But the fact of the matter is that Lori Miller committed a felony which has no statute of limitations. And I was deprived of more than $50 worth of my entitlement per month. Now, since I got on these programs, I started publishing on the web because the pigs in the area where I live help scumbags sell narcotics interstate. And I proved that on the web. And I compiled an impressive amount of data proving it. Now, some of that data, just a tiny little bit, is on YouTube and my website. And when I started publishing on the web, the pigs got into my website and initially destroyed it. Totally, they blanked it. And the guy who was helping me do my website, whose name I'm not going to repeat now, because the pigs threatened him. They stopped his wife on her way to work, and they read her the riot act, and the guy had to resign. And at that point in time, I bought some Video Professor discs and learned basically how I could get into my website and rebuild it. But I am not any kind of a computer maven. But this is the results of a long overdue determination on an appeal where I was told by an administrative law judge that my rent payment doesn't have anything to do with my amount of money that I receive on my food stamps. So 2 weeks ago, I called Sherry Duncan. And I told Sherry Duncan that I have a friend of mine called the Department of Human Services in Des Moines. And using his record, we were able to determine that the local office has been lying to me all of this time. That your rent payment is absolutely directly related to the amount of food stamps you receive. I am here to tell you that that is the first and only time that I lied to anyone with the Department of Human Services. I made no such call to the Des Moines Department of Human Services. I buffaloed them. And because I buffaloed them, they relented. Psych! And that only proves what the late, great Sam Kinison said. Lies enhance your relationship. That's right. I lied to him. I told him I did something I didn't do. And I could prove it. But the thing is, I already knew that if you're paying a $400 a month rent, that you're supposed to get $90 worth of food stamps. Now I'm living in a place where I'm paying $80 less. But I'm still getting the majority of the money that I should have received, and I doubt that this amount is entirely correct, but it is almost $50 more than I was getting. What you gonna do, Saul? It took me almost 4 months to get this, after Jeff Smallwood went into my room and took it out of my fucking wallet. You know, I've known that guy for many years. And since I had last seen him in the 90s, apparently his alcohol consumption has increased quite a bit. Now, I myself drink Guinness, and Guinness is pricey stuff. You know, you used to be able to get 12 ounces in a bottle, but now you only get 11.2 ounces, which is what drug dealers do. They get you hooked, and then they raise the prices. Or, in this case, give you less. It is really a nachlunis. It's a sorrow and a pity that I had to lie to Sherry Duncan in order to get them to move to change my food stamp allotment. And they're changing my food stamp allotment based upon my current rent shows that an administrative law judge with the Iowa Department of Human Services lied to me during hearing, and before that hearing started, she called me a liar. And that proves Freud's theory of projection, that people who are liars will accuse you of doing things that you're not doing. And it is significant that by lying to Sherry Duncan, that I was able to get my food stamps up to a nearly reasonable level. I shouldn't have had to do that. And the only reason I had to do that is because I outed the local police for selling drugs. They're getting a kickback on the drugs they sell. Now, if the government were to be reasonable and stop placing people in jail for doing drugs, I might not have done that. But the thing is that people who sell cocaine and methamphetamine and test tube drugs, the kinds of drugs that we know will harm people, those motherfuckers ought to go to jail. But the users ought to be treated a lot differently. And the consumption of marijuana should be decriminalized. But they don't want to do this because they're full of shit. It's nobody's business what anybody does. As long as you don't go out on the road inebriated and are driving what is essentially a 2-ton missile, it's nobody's business. if you're not doing surgery on somebody. It's nobody's business if you're inebriated. But they want to make it their business because there's money in it. This money does not benefit the users, and it does not benefit the community. But it benefits people like Terry Brooks or Captain Sikorsky of the Davenport Police Department. It benefits them because that kickback money goes right into their pockets. And I ended up having to lie to Sherry Duncan. Ended up having to lie to her to get my food stamps changed. But the fact of the matter is that Lori Miller, for over 10 years, has been committing a felony which has no statute of limitations. This is Dmitry Ivanovich. That's spelled with a B. Ivanovich. With the naked truth.